Phil, that was Dena Merriam, who's it's very inspiring the work she's doing. Again, a case of somebody with deep spiritual convictions, a practitioner, follower, as she said, of Paramahansa Yogananda, and taking that spirituality and that inner development and working in the world to create a better world. So, very inspiring.
Yeah. Always inspired me. I always have been impressed with her work, and hope that others are as well. She's a good role model for the balance of the inner development and good citizenship and responsible action in the world.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things she brought out that is an issue that should really be pushed and pursued, and that is that a lot of major religions, let's look at Catholicism, have sexist policies institutionalized. We have as I said, we have very progressive Pope, Pope Francis, but you can't be a cardinal, you can't be a bishop, you can't be the Pope, you can't have a leadership position in the Catholic Church if you're a woman. And I think the parishioners, the people in those religions, should absolutely not tolerate it. It should be thought of in the same way as if a major religion had a policy where people of color could participate but cannot take positions of leadership. It's just wrong, and I don't buy into well, this is what it's been going on for thousands of years. I mean, slavery went on for thousands of years, so it's that's not a a legitimate reason for having those policies, I think.
Well, I will vote for you if you're up for running for the next pope.
Yeah, I think that actually I remember back in days when I was taking what was called catechism, Catholic training or indoctrination or whatever you want to call it, and there was some very interesting stuff. And I remember once a priest saying the only criteria for being a pope was that you were a man and that you were alive. There wasn't even a ruling that you had to be a Catholic, but it was that a man, not a woman. So that's very deep in their thinking and their beliefs, and I don't know where that came from because I don't remember ever reading anything in the New Testament about that.
Mm, Well, but attitudes toward women that we have now are relatively modern, sort of evolutionary development. People always in history, men always felt women shouldn't be in positions of leadership, and we know the whole history.
Right.
So some institutions evolve more slowly than others, I guess, and I guess they justify it with theological arguments or
Hmm.
historical arguments. I always hear, well, Jesus didn't, the 12 apostles were men, so therefore,
Yeah.
we
Right.
can't have women. And it's a shame because I've met so many deeply committed Catholic women, including nuns, who just feel they would do a wonderful job and they would get great fulfillment if they could perform mass
Hmm.
and do some of the other
Yeah.
functions that priests do.
Yeah. And a lot
They'd
of the
certainly
Protestant
be
religions. Yeah.
they'd certainly be great, pastoral
Right.
counselors
Right.
in ways that men may not always be capable
Right.
of.
And in conservative and Orthodox Judaism, I believe it's the same way that Reform Judaism, you could have a woman rabbi, but I believe the conservative
Yeah.
and Orthodox would not allow
Well,
it.
there may be among the conservative Jews female rabbis, but I don't know how that works.
Right.
It's not as hierarchical as the Catholic
The
Church.
Catholic
So
Church has really very rigid, strict, written rules. There's no wiggle room there really. But getting back to Dina's work, I mean, I think it's fabulous what she's doing, and a spiritual practitioner who is committed to changing the world, uplifting people, and especially her work in in the environmental issues that are becoming, real issues today. I mean, Mother Earth, you could argue, is being destroyed, and only human beings can turn that around, and only human beings caused it. So
Yeah.
it becomes an issue that religious leaders, spiritual leaders need to deal with, and perhaps more effectively than our politicians or other folks
Well,
that have dealt with it
they
so far.
certainly seem to be. In fact, I think there's probably more agreement or more common ground in spiritual and religious circles around the sacredness of Earth and the need to protect it than there is in most social issues and certainly religious issues. I mean, even the what we think of as the conservative evangelical Christians, there's a whole development there, especially among younger evangelicals who are very environmentally conscious in
Hmm.
ways that previous generations weren't. So
Right.
it's one
Yeah.
of the ways. It's one of the issues around which people are more likely to come together uh, across the boundaries of traditions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, she mentioned her interactions with Native American spiritual leaders, and I think one area of leadership, one area where they are proving to have been very advanced in terms of their thinking is the relationship between human beings and the earth, and the
Sure.
sacredness of the earth, and the responsibility toward the earth, and thinking many generations ahead, which is something that our culture, Western civilization, hasn't really given much thought to over the last many centuries, and now maybe paying a very high price for that. And yet,
Yeah.
and still, folks within our culture fighting that. So,
Yeah. And one can see doing work on behalf of the environment as a spiritual act, as a sign of one's spiritual commitment to making life on the planet better, and a form of perhaps karma yoga
mhm,
to engage in service and be protected. There's something about even something as minor as recycling or being conscious of not wasting water that connects you in a certain way to the earth and the natural environment, and if you look at that a certain way, it's a spiritual act.
right. No, unquestionably I mean, I have a friend who's a strong environmentalist, and he spends a good part of the year living in the rainforest in Costa Rica, and he said
Huh.
that that's his church, that is his spiritual environment that he goes to
Yeah.
advance himself spiritually, and that it's very easy to forget that and feel very disconnected from that in the type of
Yeah.
world we live in, with electricity and everything else that we have that takes us away from noticing and feeling our natural environment. So a lot to be learned there, and I think that she's pointing out some very important stuff, doing some very good work.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I thought it would be good to have her on is she's a very good example of somebody who appreciates the importance of the inner dimension of spiritual development as part, complementary and harmonious part with social action.
Right.
Uh, there's often a disconnect between the inner work and the social engagement. And there's
Hmm.
people like Dena who recognize the importance of both of them, both those dimensions complementing one another.
Right.
It's
She
important.
she mentioned
It's
that she's
important.
a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda, and you're writing his biography. Did Yogananda speak much about social responsibility and responsibilities in
Yeah.
terms of?
No, he did. He did. He was, look, he was a great example himself. He always wanted to, on a personal level, retire essentially and go. As a little kid, he was running off to the Himalayas, and his family was following after him and dragging him back. So he always had this pull to the renunciation and the contemplative life in a cave. But he was called by his own destiny, his own dharma, to be active and involved in the world. And he, I think, like his guru did for him, encouraged other people to live responsible lives. But the first step was to meditate and open one's awareness to true nature of the self and all those things that gurus always taught, but then to come out and behave in a socially responsible way.
Right. And to get people to behave in a socially responsible way, one of the best ways to do that, or the most fundamental way to do that, is have them evolve spiritually. And then if they evolve spiritually, they will no longer be deaf to those to the advice of those who know that are in tune with nature and what we need to do to stay that way. Anyway,
yeah, it does improve the odds.
Yes. All right. Well, till
All
next
right,
time.
Dennis.
Over and out.
Okay.